There exists a peculiar moment in every person's life, a silent and almost imperceptible instant where the world around seems to freeze. It's as if someone had pressed the pause button on existence's soundtrack. Traffic continues passing, people keep walking, the clock marks the seconds, but something within you awakens from a deep sleep and whispers an uncomfortable question: what am I doing here? It's in this moment of suspension that consciousness emerges from the depths of the soul like a desperate scream, tearing through the veil of routine and forcing you to face the raw nakedness of your own existence. You know this sensation. Perhaps it happened on a Sunday morning, or during a work meeting, or while observing your reflection in the mirror. Suddenly, the life that seemed so solid and full of purpose reveals itself fragile as wet paper, and you find yourself before an abyss that was always there, but which you had masterfully learned to ignore. Albert Camus called this experience awakening to the absurd, and today we're going to dive deeply into this uncomfortable territory where human consciousness finally recognizes its most fundamental condition. We're going to explore together this moment of pause, where everything that seemed solid dissolves, and we're forced to confront the most frightening question of all. If nothing has definitive meaning, how do we continue living? Prepare yourself for a journey that will shake the foundations of your understanding about existence, purpose, and the courage necessary to live authentically. Think for a moment about the last time you caught yourself seriously questioning the meaning of everything you were doing. Maybe it was on a Monday morning, while preparing for another day, just like all the others, when suddenly you stopped before the mirror and asked yourself, what's all this for? Why wake up? Work, consume, sleep, wake up again. It's as if for an instant, the curtain of normalcy had been pulled back, and you glimpsed something disturbing behind it, an immense void where there should be answers. This moment of frightening lucidity is what Camus identified as awakening to the absurd condition of human existence. The French philosopher understood that there's something fundamentally contradictory in the experience of being human. We are beings who desperately long for meaning, for definitive answers, for a clear explanation about our presence in this world. We carry within us an insatiable thirst for understanding, a profound need for our life to mean something greater than the mere succession of days. We seek purpose in relationships, in career, in religion, in art, in science, in anything that might offer us a solid anchor in an ocean of uncertainties. However, the universe remains silent. There's no cosmic voice whispering in our ears what the meaning of everything is. There's no instruction manual waiting for us in a secret drawer of existence. This tension between our human need for meaning and the apparent indifference of the universe is what Camus defined as the absurd. It's not that life is meaningless in itself, but rather that there's an irreconcilable conflict between our search for significance and the silence we encounter as a response. It's like shouting on a mountain and discovering there's no echo, like asking a vital question and realizing there's nobody there to answer it. The absurd is born from this confrontation, from this impossible encounter between human need and indifferent reality. When this perception erupts in our consciousness, we usually experience what we could call existential vertigo. It's a sensation similar to what we feel when looking down from a great height, but instead of contemplating a physical abyss, we're facing the abyss of our own condition. Everything that previously seemed important and urgent suddenly loses its solidity. The goals we pursued with such dedication, the dreams we nurtured, the worries that kept us awake at night, all of this suddenly seems small and arbitrary before the immensity of our fundamental ignorance about why we're here. Many people, upon experiencing this awakening, feel tempted to quickly flee back to the comfort of routine. It's understandable. It's much easier to plunge again into daily concerns, professional goals, relationships, entertainment, anything that might muffle this inconvenient cry of consciousness. Camus observed that most people live what he called an inauthentic life, an existence where we consciously avoid confronting the fundamental question of the absurd. We create occupations, develop habits, construct identities, all of this functioning as a kind of anesthesia against the anguish of recognizing our condition. But there's a problem with this escape. It's never completely effective. The consciousness of the absurd, once awakened, has a tendency to return at the most unexpected moments. It might be during a superficial conversation when we suddenly realize we're playing a role we didn't consciously choose. It might be while observing other people chasing after objectives that seem as arbitrary as our own. It might be on a sleepless night when silence forces our mind to confront questions we preferred to keep dormant. The pause in the external world eventually forces a pause in the internal world, and that's when consciousness takes advantage to scream louder. Camus identified several ways people try to escape confrontation with the absurd. One of the most common is what he called philosophical suicide, which doesn't necessarily involve physical death, but rather the death of critical reason. This can happen when someone surrenders completely to an ideology, to a dogmatic religion, to a belief system that promises definitive answers to all existential questions. It's a form of intellectual anesthesia, where the person abdicates their capacity for questioning in exchange for the psychological security of having all the answers already prepared. Another form of escape is diving completely into daily pragmatism, transforming oneself into a productivity machine that doesn't stop to reflect. These people fill every minute of the day with activities, commitments, goals, projects, anything that keeps the mind too busy to ask uncomfortable questions. They live in constant acceleration, as if speed could leave behind the existential questions that pursue them. But Camus knew this is also a form of bad faith, a refusal to assume responsibility for consciously confronting our condition. There's still the escape through hedonism, where the person tries to drown existential anguish in an unbridled search for immediate pleasures. Excessive consumerism, various addictions, multiple superficial relationships, any form of constant stimulation that might mask the fundamental void. It's like trying to block out the sun with a sieve, a desperate attempt not to see what's right before our eyes. The problem is that pleasures are temporary, and in the intervals between one gratification and another, the absurd returns with renewed force. Now tell me something and be honest with yourself. How many times have you felt you were living on autopilot, following routines you didn't consciously choose, pursuing objectives you didn't quite know where they came from? Right there in the comments. I feel this too, because recognizing this experience is the first step toward a more authentic life. You're not alone in this journey of questioning. Millions of people around the world have gone through this same sensation of inconvenient awakening, and your honesty about it might be exactly what someone needed to read today to feel less isolated in their own search for authenticity. But then, what does Camus propose as an alternative to these forms of escape? His answer is simultaneously simple and revolutionary. Revolt. Not political or social revolt, although these might be consequences, but existential revolt, a categorical refusal to accept the ready-made solutions offered to us for the problem of the absurd. Camusian revolt is essentially an affirmation. Yes, life might not have a predetermined transcendent meaning, but that doesn't mean we should give up living. On the contrary, it's precisely because there's no cosmic script that we're completely free to create our own meaning. This revolt isn't pessimistic, as many erroneously interpret. It's profoundly optimistic, because it starts from recognizing that we are the only ones responsible for giving shape to our existence. When we stop waiting for meaning to come from outside, when we set aside the childish hope that someone or something will tell us what life's purpose is, we open space for a much more mature and authentic way of existing. We begin to perceive that meaning isn't something we discover, but something we create through our choices, our actions, our relationships, our way of responding to the world. Camusian revolt also implies a fundamental solidarity with other human beings. When we recognize that we all share the same absurd condition, when we understand that we're all navigating an existence without guarantees, we develop a profound empathy for our fellow beings. We realize there are no absolute heroes and villains, but only people trying to make sense of a condition that's equally challenging for everyone. This understanding can make us more compassionate, less judgmental, more willing to support each other in constructing temporary but meaningful meanings. One of the most powerful metaphors Camus used to illustrate his philosophy is the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to push an enormous stone up a mountain for all eternity, knowing the stone would always roll back down when it reached the top. At first glance, it seems like a metaphor of absolute futility, a perfect representation of the absurd of the human condition. But Camus finds something profoundly liberating in this image. Sisyphus cannot change his condition, cannot escape his task, but he can choose how to relate to it. Camus imagines Sisyphus descending the mountain to fetch the stone again, and in that moment of pause, of contemplation between one cycle and the next, he glimpses a possibility of freedom. Sisyphus can choose to hate his task and live in constant, impotent revolt, or he can choose to find his own form of dignity and meaning within the repetition. He can discover pleasure in the strength of his muscles, in the beauty of the landscape he observes while descending the mountain, in the satisfaction of a challenge consciously accepted. The stone doesn't change, the task doesn't change, but Sisyphus can transform himself through his way of approaching the condition imposed upon him. We all have our Sisyphus stone. For some, it might be a job that doesn't fulfill them completely, but is necessary for survival. For others, it might be a complicated but important relationship. For many, it's simply the fact of waking up each morning knowing they'll face another day without guarantees about what it all means. The question isn't to eliminate the stone, because that's impossible. The question is discovering our own way of pushing it up the mountain with dignity, creativity, and even joy. This perspective invites us to completely rethink our relationship with suffering and with the limitations inherent to the human condition. Instead of seeing obstacles as evidence that life is fundamentally unfair or meaningless, we can begin to view them as the raw material through which we sculpt our individuality. Each challenge faced consciously, each difficulty embraced without illusions, each moment of pain accepted with courage becomes an opportunity to define who we are and what we value. Camus's philosophy teaches us that authenticity isn't in finding definitive answers, but in learning to ask the right questions. It's not in discovering a cosmic purpose for our existence, but in having the courage to create temporary purposes that genuinely reflect our values and choices. When we stop seeking external approval for our decisions, when we stop waiting for someone to tell us how to live, we open space for a form of freedom that is simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. One of the most profound consequences of this perspective is the transformation of our relationship with time. Instead of constantly living in the future, hoping things will eventually make sense, or in the past, lamenting lost opportunities, we begin to inhabit the present more intensely. Each moment becomes precious not because it's part of a grand plan, but because it's all we really have. This intensity of the present is what Camus called passion, a way of living that completely embraces immediate experience without need for transcendent justifications. Camusian passion isn't impulsiveness or irresponsibility. It's a very conscious form of engagement with life that recognizes the precariousness of everything and, for that very reason, intensely values each experience. It's as if, knowing we're mortal and our time is limited, we decided to extract the maximum richness from each available moment. This can manifest in how we savor a meal, in the attention we dedicate to a conversation, in the intensity with which we deliver ourselves to a creative project. Many people confuse Camusian philosophy with nihilism, but it's exactly the opposite. The nihilist says, "Nothing matters, so why bother?" Camus says, "Nothing has predetermined meaning, so we're free to make everything matter in our own way." It's a subtle but fundamental difference. Nihilism leads to apathy. Camusian philosophy leads to creative responsibility. When we internalize this perspective, our relationship with daily choices is transformed. Instead of asking, "What's the right choice?" we begin to ask, "Which choice allows me to live more authentically?" Instead of seeking external approval, we begin to develop our own criteria of value based on our direct experience and honest reflection. This doesn't mean we become selfish or insensitive to the consequences of our actions. On the contrary, we assume much greater responsibility because we recognize we're the only true authors of our story. This process of assuming authorship of our own life frequently involves a period of deconstruction that can be quite uncomfortable. We need to question beliefs we inherited without questioning, examine goals we pursued because we were told they were important, reevaluate relationships that might have been based on expectations rather than genuine choice. It's like renovating an old house. Before being able to rebuild, it's necessary to demolish structures that no longer serve. During this deconstruction, it's common to experience what we could call the vertigo of freedom. When we realize we're truly free to choose, that there's no external authority that can definitively tell us what to do, we can feel overwhelmed by the enormity of possibilities. It's easier to live within clear limitations, even if those limitations weren't consciously chosen, than to assume the responsibility of creating our own guidelines. But Camus reminds us that this vertigo is temporary, and that on the other side of it awaits a much richer and more authentic form of existence. When we stop seeking permission to be who we are, when we stop waiting for ideal conditions to begin living genuinely, we discover reserves of energy and creativity we didn't even know we possessed. It's as if we had spent years trying to open a door by pushing when we needed to pull. The journey toward authenticity also teaches us to distinguish between what we can control and what is beyond our power of influence. We can control our choices, our reactions, our attitude toward events. We cannot control the circumstances we encounter, other people's actions, or the final outcomes of our efforts. This distinction, although simple in theory, is revolutionary in practice. It frees us from an enormous amount of unnecessary anxiety and allows us to focus our energy where it can really make a difference. One of the most practical applications of this philosophy is in our relationship with work and career. Instead of seeking the perfect job that will supposedly give us complete fulfillment, we begin to understand that any job can become an arena for authentic expression, as long as we approach it with the right attitude. Fulfillment doesn't come from the work itself, but from the way we choose to perform it. We can find dignity and meaning in a wide variety of activities, as long as we approach them consciously and with integrity. Similarly, our understanding of success is transformed. Instead of measuring success through external criteria like wealth, status, or social approval, we begin to evaluate it based on how authentic we're being to ourselves. Success becomes less about achieving specific outcomes and more about maintaining integrity in the process. This doesn't mean outcomes don't matter. It means they are secondary to the way we choose to pursue them. Relationships are also transformed through this lens. Instead of seeking people who complete us or who confirm our existing beliefs, we begin to value those who challenge us to grow and who accept us as we are while supporting our journey toward becoming who we want to be. Romantic relationships, friendships, family dynamics, all can be approached with greater honesty and less neediness when we understand that our fundamental happiness doesn't depend on others, but on our own capacity to create meaning. If you've made it this far in this journey of reflection, you're probably already feeling there's something profoundly true in these ideas. Maybe you're already recognizing moments in your own life when glimpses of this authenticity emerged. If you think this type of content can help other people find their own path toward a more genuine life, consider subscribing to the channel. It's not just about numbers for us. It's about building a community of people who are committed to living consciously and supporting each other in this journey that can be both challenging and incredibly rewarding. Your presence here makes a difference, and your journey toward authenticity can inspire others who are just beginning to question their own assumptions about what it means to live well. What emerges from this deep exploration of Camusian philosophy is an understanding that true freedom isn't the absence of constraints, but a conscious choice of how we respond to whatever constraints we encounter. Life will always have limitations. There will always be aspects of our situation we cannot change. The question isn't how to eliminate these limitations, but how to transform our relationship with them. When we stop resenting the things we cannot control and begin to focus exclusively on what we can influence, we discover that our personal power is actually much greater than previously imagined. This shift in perspective has profound implications for how we deal with suffering. Instead of seeing pain as evidence that something is wrong with life or with us, we begin to recognize it as an inevitable part of the human experience that can actually deepen our understanding and compassion. Every person who ever lived experienced pain, uncertainty, moments of doubt. Recognizing this connects us to something larger than ourselves without necessitating belief in anything supernatural or transcendent. Suffering doesn't disappear when we adopt a Camusian perspective, but our relationship with it changes dramatically. Instead of being victims of circumstances beyond our control, we become active participants in the creation of meaning through the way we choose to respond. Each moment of difficulty becomes an opportunity to exercise our freedom to choose our attitude, to define what kind of person we want to be under pressure. This philosophy also offers an alternative to both cynicism and naive optimism. Cynicism says that people are fundamentally selfish and that idealism is foolish. Naive optimism ignores real challenges and pretends everything will work out without effort. Camus offers a third way: clear-eyed recognition of reality combined with determination to create value and meaning despite the absence of guarantees. It's a form of mature hope that doesn't depend on external validation, but on our own commitment to live with integrity. The applications of this understanding extend to questions about purpose and legacy. Instead of worrying about whether our life will have lasting impact or whether we'll be remembered, we can focus on whether we're living according to our deeper values right now, today, in this moment. Legacy isn't something that happens after death. It's something we create every day through small choices that reflect who we want to be. Every act of honesty, every moment of genuine connection, every choice to face difficulty with dignity contributes to a legacy that is meaningful regardless of whether anyone else notices. Eventually, what Camus offers us is not a solution to the absurd of existence, but a way to live fully within it. He doesn't promise that questions about meaning will eventually be answered satisfactorily. He doesn't suggest that suffering can be eliminated or that death can be avoided. What he offers is much more valuable: a way to live with dignity, creativity, and even joy, while fully acknowledging the reality of our condition. When the world pauses and consciousness screams, we don't need to panic. We can listen to what that voice within is trying to tell us. Maybe it's time to question assumptions we never really examined. Maybe it's time to stop living the life others expect us to live and start creating one that genuinely reflects who we are. Maybe it's time to stop waiting for perfect conditions and start working with the materials we have right now to build something meaningful. The consciousness that screams when the world pauses is not our enemy. It's our most trusted guide toward authentic existence. That voice may be uncomfortable, but it's also our path to freedom. When we stop silencing it with distractions and begin to listen carefully to what it has to say, we discover it's not leading us toward despair, but toward a form of existence that is both more honest and more alive than anything we experienced, while trying to escape from fundamental questions about what it means to be human. So the next time the world makes that familiar pause and you feel consciousness emerging from the depths, don't run. Don't distract yourself. Don't reach immediately for whatever you usually use to numb that feeling. Instead, sit with it. Listen to what it has to say. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be in this moment? What choice would reflect my deepest values? How can I respond to this situation in a way that honors both realism about my limitations and commitment to live as fully as possible within them? In those questions, and in your honesty in answering them, you'll find not answers about the cosmic purpose of life, but something much more valuable: clarity about who you are and what matters to you enough to base your choices on. And that, in the end, is all any of us can really ask for. The opportunity to live consciously, choose deliberately, and create meaning through the simple but profound act of being authentic to ourselves while remaining compassionately connected to others who share this strange, challenging, beautiful experience of being human.